Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling something pretty fascinating, I think. The lives of Moses and Jesus. But through a lens you might not expect. We're talking education.
It's funny. We often get caught up in, well, the divine aspects of their stories,
Yeah.
miracles, prophecies, the whole bit.
Right, right.
But we kind of skip over something pretty fundamental, their education, what they learned, how it shaped their thinking, how it, well, ultimately led them to do what they did.
It's a great point. And we have a fantastic guide for this journey. David Rosenberg's book, An Educated Man, a dual biography of Moses and Jesus.
Oh, this book is a real eye-opener. It flips the script on a lot of, I think, common assumptions about these pivotal figures.
So let's start with Moses. Most of us picture him, learning the ways of the Egyptian court.
Right. But Rosenberg suggests, well, something a lot more expansive. Think about it. Moses grew up in the heart of the Egyptian empire, surrounded by, well, incredible advancements, philosophy, science, even medicine. This wasn't just any education. This was top-tier stuff.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you put it that way. Not just a boy raised in a palace, but like a product of this advanced civilization.
Exactly. And there's evidence to back this up. Rosenberg points to some ancient Egyptian medical texts, and they have these, well, striking parallels with parts of the Torah.
Really?
Makes you wonder, right? Did all this Egyptian thought, with its emphasis on reason and observation, did that influence Moses later on, when he starts, questioning traditional beliefs?
Now, that is a fascinating thought. It's not just Moses blindly following orders, receiving commands.
Not at all.
He's questioning, he's arguing, take the burning bush. He doesn't just accept. He's asking questions. He's pushing back a little.
That's precisely it. Rosenberg suggests that maybe, just maybe, this Egyptian education, it gave Moses those critical thinking skills, the ability to have this, well, unique relationship with the divine.
Okay, so we're seeing Moses in a new light here. Not just a prophet, but a product of his education. And that education may have been the key to his ability to question, interpret, and ultimately redefine his understanding of, God?
And this leads us to, I think, a really core argument in Rosenberg's book. He talks about the biblical narrative as, and this is a great image, a cosmic theater.
A cosmic theater.
Yeah, he's suggesting that the covenant, it isn't just this static contract, it's a journey, a dynamic journey of interpretation.
So, what does that actually look like? Viewing the Bible as a cosmic theater?
Well, it's this powerful metaphor. It says, hey, the Bible isn't just a dry historical record. It's this stage where the drama of faith, doubt, interpretation, it unfolds across generations. And both Moses and Jesus, in their own ways, were actors in this grand play, actively engaging with Scripture, reinterpreting it for their times.
So it's not just about, following the rules. It's about wrestling with these texts.
Yeah.
Trying to find deeper meaning, new ways to apply, ancient wisdom to the challenges of their time.
Exactly. And, their education, it gave them the tools for that engagement.
So now let's shift gears a bit, talk about Jesus. We often see him purely through, faith, right?
Of course.
But Rosenberg really emphasizes that Jesus was deeply educated in Jewish tradition.
Absolutely. He was likely immersed in studying Targums, which are Aramaic translations of the Torah. And there's even some thought that he might have encountered writings by Philo of Alexandria, a pretty prominent Jewish philosopher at the time.
So we're talking not just familiarity with Scripture, but grappling with some pretty complex philosophical ideas. What does that mean for, how we understand his teachings?
Well, Rosenberg uses this, I think, really intriguing term, numinous writer. And he uses it to describe people like Moses and Jesus, people who saw themselves continuing this long tradition of, interpreting the divine will. They weren't just passively receiving, they were actively shaping it.
So Jesus, not just preaching, but contributing to an ongoing conversation within Jewish tradition, drawing on his education to, offer new interpretations of ancient wisdom.
Right. And we see this reflected in the Gospels, too. They're rooted in faith, obviously. But they also serve as these meditations on Jesus's life and teachings.
Yeah.
Echoing that interpretive spirit of Jewish tradition. They're not just recording history, they're engaging with it, offering these, new layers of meaning.
Wow, that's a whole new way of looking at things. So we're seeing a common thread here. Both Moses and Jesus, different contexts, but deeply shaped by their educations. They were thinkers, interpreters, and reformers.
Yeah.
But I get the feeling there's more to this connection, right?
Oh, absolutely. Rosenberg points out some really striking parallels in their life stories, too, going beyond just their education. Both faced exile and return. both challenged conventional thinking, faced resistance, and both, this is key, redefined leadership through education and service.
So it's not just about what they learned, but how they use that knowledge in their lives, their leadership.
Think about Moses smashing the tablets, right?
Right.
After that whole golden calf incident.
Mhm.
That was a powerful statement. A rejection of idolatry, refusing to reduce the divine to just a physical object. It challenged how people understood faith at its core.
And if we fast forward to Jesus, we see something similar, overturning the money changers' tables in the temple, emphasizing spiritual values over, I don't know, material wealth and blind ritual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These weren't just impulsive acts. They were calculated, shocking people out of their complacency, pushing them toward, well, a deeper, more internal understanding of faith.
So both Moses and Jesus, in their own way, challenging the status quo, pushing back against rigid interpretations, encouraging, well, a more thoughtful, more engaged approach to religion. And their education seems to have played a huge role in their, I guess, their boldness. It's fascinating how their education, really gave them that power to challenge those in power, even religious authority. Makes you wonder, though, were they always so certain? Did they ever struggle with their own faith?
That's a great question. And, it's something Rosenberg addresses head on. He doesn't shy away from the complexities of their personalities. He acknowledges that even these figures, these, prophets, divinely inspired, whatever you want to call them, they weren't immune to doubt, anger, frustration.
Yeah, it humanizes them a bit, doesn't it? To think that they grappled with real emotions, tough situations, just like we all do. Got any examples from the book that come to mind?
Well, there's this one scene, really powerful. Rosenberg describes YHWH, enraged by the Israelites' lack of faith, threatening to just wipe them out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Moses who steps in, argues with God,
Mm-hmm.
even threatens to sacrifice his own life if YHWH doesn't forgive them.
Wow. Talk about a tense moment. It makes you realize that the covenant, it wasn't just about blind obedience, right? There was room for, well, disagreement, even confrontation.
Yeah, exactly. It was this dynamic relationship built on dialogue, even when that dialogue was, I don't know, difficult, uncomfortable.
And we see a similar dynamic with Jesus, right? I mean, that anger in the temple when he flips those tables. Not exactly a picture of serenity.
Right. And, it's one of those images that can be interpreted in different ways, right? Some see righteous indignation, others maybe a deeper frustration with those who'd lost sight of, well, the true meaning of faith.
It's a good reminder that real faith, true faith, it often requires us to question things, challenge the status quo, sometimes even disrupt those, well, comfortable norms.
And both Moses and Jesus, through their actions, their education, they embodied that, I think. They weren't afraid to push boundaries, shake things up, all in service of what they believed.
You mentioned Moses smashing the tablets and Jesus overturning the money changers' tables. They seem pretty different on the surface, but you're saying there's a deeper connection.
Oh, absolutely. If you look closely, both actions challenged, well, conventional ideas about religious practice. Moses smashing those tablets, it was a rejection of idolatry, refusing to reduce the divine to just a physical object.
Yeah.
A statement about inner devotion over outward displays.
And Jesus overturning those tables, was he saying something similar?
Yeah, in a way, it was rejecting this idea that you could just buy your way to spiritual purity, challenging that commodification of faith, reminding people that, well, that true connection with the divine, it runs much deeper, much more personal.
So both of them, in their own way, pushing their followers toward a more, I don't know, mature internal understanding of faith. It wasn't enough to just follow the rules. You had to understand the spirit behind them. It's a challenge that's still relevant today, isn't it? How do we avoid falling into that trap of just blindly following dogma? How do we cultivate a more thoughtful, engaged approach to our own beliefs? Make faith a living, breathing part of our lives, not just a set of, rules to follow.
Well, Rosenberg suggests that understanding the historical context of their lives can give us some clues. We often view them through the lens of later interpretations, but he encourages us to, well, go back to the source material. Really try to grasp the cultural, the political landscape of their times.
It's easy to forget that they were living in very different worlds than ours.
Exactly. Rosenberg, for instance, he delves into ancient Egypt, explores the possible influences of Egyptian thought on Moses. He even speculates on, what kind of texts Moses might have studied, what ideas he would have encountered in the royal court.
It paints a much richer, more nuanced picture of Moses. than that traditional image of, a prophet just receiving divine revelation on a mountaintop.
For sure. It's a good reminder that even those who bring forth, these new religious traditions, they're still products of their time, shaped by the intellectual currents of their world.
And I imagine understanding the Jewish context of Jesus' life is equally important, right?
Oh, absolutely. Rosenberg, he emphasizes how deeply immersed Jesus was in Jewish thought tradition. He likely studied with Pharisees, engaged in debates about interpreting Scripture. He wasn't operating in a vacuum. He was actively participating in those intellectual, religious debates of his time.
It kind of challenges the common perception of Jesus as this figure who broke entirely from Judaism, doesn't it?
It does. Rosenberg presents him as someone who is both a product and a reformer of Jewish tradition. He was building on the legacy of Moses, the prophets, but also pushing those boundaries of understanding interpretation.
That perspective is incredibly enriching, I think, for both Jewish and Christian readers.
Yeah, it fosters this greater appreciation for the interconnectedness of these two faith traditions, encourages a more nuanced understanding of their shared history.
And it stresses the importance of, really studying these stories within their original context, rather than imposing later interpretations on them.
Speaking of interpretations, Rosenberg delves into a topic that often gets overlooked, the oral Torah.
Now, that's something I'm really interested in, because I think most of us, when we hear Torah, we think written text, right? But you're saying there's more to it.
Exactly. The traditional understanding focuses on that written text, but Rosenberg points out that there was this rich oral tradition within Judaism, this vast body of, interpretations, teachings passed down through generations.
So how does this connect back to Moses? We typically think of him as, the author of the Torah.
Well, Rosenberg suggests that while the Torah is attributed to Moses, it probably went through this long process of compilation, redaction, over many centuries, and the oral tradition played a huge role in shaping the text as we know it today.
So it wasn't just Moses, sitting down and writing the whole thing in one go.
Right. It was much more dynamic.
Mhm.
Generations of scholars, interpreters, adding their insights, their understanding.
And how does Jesus fit into this picture of the oral Torah?
Rosenberg argues that Jesus, through his teachings, his actions, was engaging with that oral tradition too, reinterpreting it. He wasn't simply quoting scripture. He was, adding his own layer of interpretation, contributing to that ongoing conversation within Judaism.
It's fascinating to think about. We so often see Jesus solely through the lens of Christianity, but you're saying his roots were firmly planted in this Jewish tradition of oral interpretation.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that these stories, they're part of a much larger tapestry of faith tradition, much richer than we often realize.
It encourages us to, approach them with a little humility, I think, and openness to different perspectives.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Rosenberg also explores the development of the temple in Jerusalem. And he makes this fascinating connection to the Ark of the Covenant that Moses carried through the wilderness.
I have to admit, I never made that connection. How are those two things related?
Well, think about the Ark. It contained the tablets of the law, right? Representing the presence of God. It was the center of, religious life for the Israelites during their wanderings. And the temple, in a way, became a permanent embodiment of that idea, a physical manifestation of God's presence right there in the heart of Jerusalem.
Wow, that's really something. Like the Ark evolved into the temple, taking that idea of God's presence and giving it, a physical home.
Exactly. It became this place where the covenant could be, enacted, celebrated in a much more, elaborate and institutionalized way.
It makes you realize how these ancient stories, traditions, they continue to, echo throughout history, influencing us, shaping our world in ways we might not even realize.
Yeah, it highlights the importance of understanding the historical evolution of religious ideas, tracing their development across time, across cultures.
Before we move on to, our final thoughts, I want to pause for a second and ask you, our listener, a question. What surprised you the most in our exploration of Moses and Jesus through this lens of education? What new connections, insights have you made?
It really is amazing to see those connections,
Yeah.
from this portable ark to this grand temple in Jerusalem, underscores the idea that faith and tradition, they're always evolving.
And that evolution, it's often driven by people like Moses and Jesus. Those who challenge conventional thought reinterpret those ancient ideas for their own time. Their education, it wasn't just about absorbing information. It was about learning how to think critically, how to use that knowledge to make a real difference.
Speaking of reinterpreting those ancient ideas, Rosenberg brings up another fascinating parallel between Moses and Jesus, this idea of both figures experiencing a symbolic death and rebirth. Oh, that's a good one. He points out how Moses, after fleeing Egypt, spending years in exile, he comes back transformed, this new leader ready to, guide his people to freedom, almost like he had to die to his old life to be reborn into his true purpose.
And Jesus, going through the crucifixion and resurrection, he undergoes this similar transformation,
Yeah.
becoming this symbol of, spiritual rebirth, redemption. It's that idea of letting go of the old self to embrace something new.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? And it highlights this theme that runs throughout the Bible, this idea that real growth, true liberation, it often requires us to confront death. Not necessarily physical death, but, shedding old patterns, beliefs, limitations, making way for something more authentic, more fulfilling.
Yeah, it's a metaphor that resonates across so many cultures, spiritual traditions. It speaks to that universal human experience, right? Transformation, those cycles of death and rebirth that we all go through, in different ways, of course.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that the journey of faith, it's rarely a straight line. It's got twists and turns, challenges, setbacks, those moments of profound change that force us to, re-examine who we are, what we believe.
Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into an educated man, I want to touch on one more idea that Rosenberg brings up. He suggests that we should approach the Bible not just as, a religious text, but as a work of literature. Appreciate its artistry, its narrative power.
It's like reading a great poem, a play. He encourages us to just, suspend our disbelief for a bit, immerse ourselves in the stories, the characters, let ourselves be swept away by the language, the power of that narrative.
It's about going beyond the literal interpretation, right? Engaging with the text on this deeper, more imaginative level, experiencing the Bible as art that speaks to the human condition in these profound and timeless ways.
Exactly. And it opens up these whole new avenues for understanding, appreciation. We could look at the complexity of the characters, the themes that still resonate today,
Yeah.
the sheer beauty of how these stories are told. The Bible isn't just a rule book, a historical account. It's this masterpiece of literature that can move us, inspire us on so many levels.
This deep dive has really, I think, expanded my understanding of Moses and Jesus. We've gone deep into their education, their struggles, their lasting impact, and we've seen how their journeys of learning shaped not only their own lives, but, the course of history, the development of these two major world religions.
We've also been challenged to think about ourselves, right? As sacred readers, approaching these ancient texts with curiosity, respect, openness to new interpretations. It's an invitation to have this ongoing conversation with them, letting them challenge us, inspire us in new ways.
So as we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you, our listeners, with one final thought. What does it mean to be an educated person today? Is it just about, accumulating knowledge, or is there something more to it?
How can we, like Moses and Jesus, embrace that lifelong journey of learning? Challenge our own assumptions. Seek out deeper meaning in the world around us. We hope you'll keep exploring these questions. Find your own path to becoming, an educated person in the truest sense of the word.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity, inspired you to keep exploring that fascinating intersection of history, faith, education. Until next time, happy reading.